Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of the Bookum Nook Show. My name is Kyle Colley, and this is a special episode of Founders Talk Podcast, a podcast for founders that tell their stories, ideas, and visions of the future. This episode is brought to you today by Bookum, the book community's new and best way to host dynamic online book clubs. Download the app and start your book club today at www.bookumapp.com. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. My guest today is the wonderful Kathleen Schmidt. Kathleen has over 25 years of experience in the book publishing industry. She has worked on over 50 plus New York Times bestsellers. Kathleen is the president of KMSPR, a strategy, marketing, PR, and branding firm focused on authors, publishers, and publishing adjacent entities. Kathleen is also the writer behind the wonderful Publishing Confidential blog. She is a mother of puppies and teenagers and a book lover. Kathleen, welcome to the Founders Talk podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I kind of want to start with, I noticed that you had a big inspiration. It was the FLOTUS of the United States, the editor Jackie Kennedy. So I kind of want to start with a quote she had. She said, "There are many little ways to enlarge a child's world. Love of books is the best of all." So I wanted you to talk to me a little bit about your household's love of books growing up and kind of the impact Jackie Kennedy had on your life.
Sure. Well, both of my parents were readers. My father was more of a serious reader, and there were books in our house all the time because of our public library. We didn't grow up with a lot of money. My parents were very blue collar, middle class, and we couldn't afford to go out and buy books. So library played a big part of my life growing up, and my dad would always take me. And while he was getting books out or looking for books for himself, I would go into the kids section and the adult section sometimes, and just roam around and try to find books to read. And that's where I got very interested in Judy Blume, Nancy Drew books, things like that. I mean, Judy Blume was probably my number one author when I was a kid,
Very cool.
and those are the books that I got out the most. Yeah. So they played a really big part in my life growing up. My father was never without a book to read. My mom was a huge romance reader, and so am I in adulthood. And about Jackie Kennedy, the more I read about her as I was a teenager and thinking about going to college, the more I was enamored of her love of books and her career path after she was out of the White House and went through so many personal tragedies and decided to become, a book editor at Random House. And I just felt like, I romanticized it, really was what it was. I mean, she had this great big life in New York City. She dressed impeccably. She was super smart. And she was a reader, and it kind of got in my brain, well, that's what I want to do for a living. So she inspired me in that way.
Yeah, awesome. And then, so how did that transition to you starting to get into like working with your first New York Times bestseller and some of the lessons you
Mhm.
learned there, especially when it comes to like being an editor and all that as well?
Um, well, most of my career was as a publicist, as a book
Yeah.
publicist. So the f- I can, this is terrible, but I cannot remember the first New York Times bestseller I worked on. I can remember a notable one early on in my career, which was a book by Eric Jerome Dickey, who passed away a few years ago. His entire catalog of books um were really, they were the Black romance books of that time, and were hugely popular. But it was also a time in media where it was incredibly difficult to get him attention.
Yeah.
And I remember, working really hard on a piece in USA Today and a feature in the New York Times for him. And those things finally happened, but they didn't happen until there was this groundswell of sales for one of his books that finally hit the New York Times bestseller list. And that was really exhilarating for he and I. And we remained friends. I was his publicist for about 8 or 9 years, and we remained friends throughout the rest of his life. So he meant a lot to me in my career, and meant a lot to many different readers around the country.
No, that's awesome. And so and speaking of that, because you do a lot of PR, but you said you aren't just a publicist, you also are a strategist. So when it comes
Mhm.
to being a strategist for a book in the book industry, how does that play? Like how do you do that whole how does that work all around?
I look at authors in a 360 degree angle, and I want to know where they've been, where they are now, where they would like to go, and what are the things that they feel they need to do to get to the place where they want to be in their writing careers. But at the same time, I'm there to advise them on what strategies will work best to do those things. So if I have an author who comes to me and, their only goal is to get a review in the New York Times, that's not someone I'm likely to take on as a client, because that's not really a strategy. That's just saying, marking something off of a wish list. So as a strategist, I look at marketing, I look at publicity, I do look at, the kinds of books they're writing. I look at their branding, all their social media, and try to put the pieces of their, writing puzzle together so that we can forge a path forward in their career.
Yeah, and so for that, is that just over extended period, or how does that kind of work? Is that a bunch of that strategy in the first couple months, and then the book you kind of hope it gets into more of the backlist and people go
Mhm.
on, or how does that kind of work from a long tail perspective?
It really depends on the book.
Yeah.
Sometimes, people start working with me about 8 months, 7 or 8 months prior to their book being published, and that's a good amount of time to do all of the things I just talked about. If someone comes to me with less time, say 3 or 4 months before a book comes out, that's a little tougher, because if they don't have a platform and they don't have, any publicity connections or any ideas about marketing, and their publisher's not doing much, then it's harder to forge a path forward that will end up in a successful place. So I try really hard to work with people as early as possible, and there are different, it's different for every book. So some people need to build a community around, what kind of book they're writing. Maybe it's a nonfiction book, maybe it's, something about self-improvement. Other people are fiction writers and they have absolutely no platform. So then it's kind of, working with them and figuring out, how do we connect you with your readers? How are we defining your readers? What is the perfect reader profile for your book, and where can we find those people?
Yeah, and I've noticed that your role in the book space is changing a lot, just like from your your
Mhm.
Substack and some of the things that you're writing. So, what are been some
Mhm.
like glaring problems that you've noticed in the book industry right now?
Is that I found striking in, in listening to CEOs talk, was that they were all talking about, this problem of finding audiences for books. And I was sitting in the audience thinking, well, it's really not as hard as they're making it seem. The problem is that they generalize the audience for books too much. And they don't look at books as, you have to look at a book as an individual thing, and not, an overall, we're going to find an audience for the entire list that we publish. Your book is not for everyone, and that's really important. And it's a big problem in publishing right now, I feel, because, if there's a fiction book, it's kind of cookie cutter. Okay, what did we do for the last fiction book that we published that we can do here? And that's a glaring problem to me. Other problems that have been going on for a very long time are, really important departments are understaffed, like marketing, publicity, production could be understaffed at times. There the low pay for entry level, positions in publishing, and and how long it takes to get promoted in publishing. These are all problems that lead to people, who may not want to work as hard on some books because they're not getting compensated fairly for the work that they're doing. So that's also a big problem. And I think all of these things go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's so interesting you say that because we work with like book content creators and readers. So the audience thing is really not the issue because I see it all the time,
Mhm,
especially the content creators we work with. They can talk about any book in the world that has
mhm.
a big, massive following that would want to get on these books. So it's interesting that you would say that. For that's how some of the book publishing founders think. I think that's really interesting. But from your side of things, being the president of KMSPR and being an optimist about the future of publishing, how does your company help solve some of those problems you're talking about?
I'm helping solve the problems. Um, but when I write my Substack, what I try to do is when I present a problem, I try to present solutions to it.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that anybody's listening to me. It doesn't mean executives in publishing are listening to me, but I've had enough feedback from agents and authors and people who, are in different levels in their publishing career saying, thank you for writing what you're writing because you're telling the truth about what the industry is really like and you're presenting actual solutions to some of these things. Does it mean that they'll be implemented? I don't know. If they were smart, someone would hire me to do it for them. But there's nothing unsolvable in publishing. It's just the inability of people to want to try different things and take risks. Publishing it's a risky business, but it's also a risk averse business
Mm.
when it comes down to it. People are not as open to trying new things as they maybe should be.
Yeah, and one of the new things, or at least obviously it's continued to grow, is the size of like independent publishers and hybrid
Mhm.
publishing. We were talking
Yep.
to Brooke Warner yesterday, and I wanted to kind of hear about what you think about when it comes to those being bright spots in the publishing space.
I think Brooke is doing a fantastic job, with her publishing company. I think it's a really smart, model that she has. And I think it's something that's going to become more and more popular within the next 5 years. I also think that self-publishing is going to become more normalized in the next 5 years. It's already becoming pretty normalized, but the more I talk to people who are frustrated in finding an agent or frustrated in trying to figure out who would publish their book, the more the conversation turns to, well, should I self-publish this? And then we have a conversation about that. So I think that what we're going to see going forward is a lot of different models of book publishing that buck against what the traditional publishers are doing these days.
Yeah, and when it comes to traditional publishers, one of the things that really sticks out is those big advances. So I'm kind of
Mhm.
curious from like your inside perspective, like what makes those make sense, and then what is kind of now, because I even remember some the DOJ issue was going down that they said that if
Mhm.
they merged those advances would kind of take over. So I'm curious how you think about advances and all those things.
Advances are not, they make no sense. I mean, they just don't. Um, it's really hard to put a price on, someone's work all day and try to explain profit and loss, reports that editors run before they acquire a book, and they try to figure out how much money they're going to need to spend on a book and on the marketing in order to make a profit. But at the end of the day, it's all guesswork. There's no science to it. Honestly, there's not. I always say that publishing math is sort of make believe math in some ways, because who's to say one book is worth $250,000 in an advance and another one is only worth $25,000 in advance. I've worked on both kinds of books, and I've worked on the $250,000 book that failed and the $25,000 book that sold like crazy and made the author a ton of money and got her a seven-figure advance for her next book. So there's no I could try to, play the good corporate soldier, but since I don't work for a publishing house, I can say that they make no sense sometimes.
Yeah.
They just don't. The one thing in the DOJ trial that was very true was when someone said they're made up, and that's true. P&Ls are made up. I mean, nobody knows how many copies a book is going to sell. It's all guesswork, all of it.
See, that's interesting because I watch a lot of movies and I think about that too. It's like sometimes movies have these huge budgets and they still flop, but then you'll have something like a Get Out that's on like a $4 million budget, but it does 250 million. So
Yeah.
there's that level of, again, it kind of goes back to what you're saying earlier about the audience. Like if the better you understand who the reader is and what the audience actually wants, then you at least can make sure you're giving them books and writers and personalities that they want to get behind. So kind of speaking of that, like when it comes to like authors and being like an author-centric publisher, like I hear that word is thrown around a lot more. Like what does that mean and how do you at least interpret it, publishers that way?
I interpret it as being someone who is very in tune with their authors and doing the things that they need to move their authors' careers forward. I consider myself a very author-centered person. I run my business, as an author-centered business, and that means that I service my authors. The problem with some of the big publishers is that they're beholden to big conglomerates. So they're first serving those big conglomerates and making sure that their numbers are good. And then, the authors. But the problem is that they have so many authors that they can't pay attention to all of them, or give the same amount of attention to all of them at the same time. And something gets lost there. And there is a I get a sense from a lot of authors that there's um, you know, uh, a feeling about the industry that they really don't take care of authors. That there's no quote unquote aftercare for authors. After they're done publishing a book, it's kind of like, okay, bye. And I'm not a believer in that. People need guidance beyond the publication of their book and what they should be doing. Things are not over a month after you published your book. You need to keep going after that, and that's a big problem in publishing today, because they seem to just like, that's it. After a month after the book comes out, you're done pretty
No, I
much.
think that's really well said. And when I think about it from the other side, it's also there's an over reliance, I think, a little bit on how much like authors and publishers think about social media too. I think when it comes to, but especially when the algorithm's changing, like at least with us with Bookum, we like make sure you see all your people and all that, so it helps the author have more exposure. But I'm seeing how the algorithm's changing. So can you also talk about like I guess how publishers think about social media and maybe how you would think about it working with authors?
I asked them what platforms they're on, but I wrong answer. But it's okay if the answer is no on them. So when if someone says, well, I'm not on any platforms, that's okay, because then what we have to do is figure out, who do you know on all these platforms that can help you promote your books. And that's why I write about the digital surrogate and what that person can do for you. And a digital surrogate is somebody who has a robust following on either all the platforms, a particular platform. It can be more than one person, and they're really the people that or may know, or may want to get to know platforms that you're not on. As far as publishers, I on another person's company, another CEO, another somebody's algorithm that they created to benefit in a certain way, instead of thinking about it, how are we going to promote this book on our own? Is there a platform we can build of our own that we can promote these books on, instead of depending on social media? Because it's so fractured right now, you're not going to get the same kind of audience engagement that you would have 5 years ago.
Yeah, I keep thinking that too, and that's honestly one of the reasons we built Bookum is like because you need that community to know about books and get behind books. And I think it's interesting that publishers haven't. They still rely on, say, like an Instagram or a Goodreads to do some of their social media when they have enough authors, they have enough books, and I think that also goes into it would help with branding too. If you if you are
Mm,
on a platform that you know is like ran by Simon Schuster and they're putting out a book, you might actually go to the bookstore that day and be like, I want a Simon Schuster book specifically, or this.
yep.
Where I don't know if that ever happened. I don't think I've ever personally walked into a bookstore and said, I'm going after a HarperCollins book. You know, it's kind of just like
Yeah.
it's really more of a author thing.
Yep, totally. And that's the thing that I think needs to change a little bit in publishing, because a HarperCollins book can be one of their very many imprints. A
Mhm.
Simon and Schuster book isn't just a Simon and Schuster book. There are so many imprints in that company. So it's like, what makes that book particular to that imprint and that publishing company? And
Yeah,
I
and
think it's important to redefine that a bit in the time we're in right now.
yeah, I agree. Because like even when it comes to like a Reese, like if Reese Witherspoon puts out a book, people go rush to the store to get it. I'm sure
Exactly,
if
exactly.
when you talk about it on Publishing Confidential, people are like, oh yeah, I'll go get it because Kathleen talks about it. We get behind those things. So if you have a community space or an app or whatever, I think people would be more likely to go jump at those books because they've talked to the author now and they've seen how you have marketed this book and they've seen
Yep.
behind the scenes of things. I think that's just where I think that's an easy way for publishing to expand in this social economy. That's just me kind of thinking out loud. I would love
I
to,
think you're right. You're right,
yeah.
though.
But I want to get into you as a writer, but I do have a question about because speaking of like brands and all that, when it comes to like celebrity memoirs, like why do those hold so much weight? Is it just because of the mass volume of how big the celebrity is, or like I because I know they rally behind those and backlist a lot.
It depends on the celebrity. I think one of the surprise hits for Simon and Schuster over the past year was Jeanette McCurdy's book. I can't remember the title of it off the top of my head.
Yeah, glad my mom
But
died or
or
something
I'm
like
glad
that.
my mom, yeah. I knew that book was going to be big because I have kids, and even though they're much older now and aged out of like the whole iCarly thing ages ago, I knew how big she was, and I knew what a following she had, in adults and in certain, areas of the culture. I knew I knew she had a huge following and like hip hop artists and stuff. So, and I really don't think that the publisher caught on to that right away, and I think it was much bigger than they had thought it would be. On the flip side, you have some celebrity books that they make a big splash and then they kind of disappear. And one of the books that I would, and not to pick on Simon and Schuster because these are all their books, but the Britney Spears memoir, yes, that was huge, when it first came out, but she didn't do any press for it. And I do think there is something to be said about, a celebrity doing media. At first I thought, well, good for her, she doesn't really need to do it. She's not capable of doing it, I don't think, personally, and I feel bad about that. But the books, the book's longevity can only be so much because she's not out there promoting it all the time. And so it's, like, how are you going to find so many new audiences for that? And then the flip side is, over at Random House, when they published Prince Harry's memoir, well, you have a royal speaking out for the
Yeah.
first time. So that's going to be huge. And that. So you're going to pay the money for that. Or an Obama book, you're going
Yeah.
to pay the money for that for Barack and Michelle, because they're just amazing people and beloved by so many of us. So it really depends on the celebrity. I think, sometimes it's unfortunate, but a lot of publishing houses, those are the kinds of books that make it possible for them to publish smaller books, basically, the non-celebrity, more literary stuff, or the debut authors that aren't going to take off right away.
Yeah, I think it still goes down to that core community too. Because on one hand, you have celebrities like, certain different type of celebrities that are looked at and they're just like they admire them, and then there's the ones that actually build like community and close knit. So I think what you're talking about with Jeanette McCurdy, she has people that just want to check in on her and actually know who she is
Mhm.
and values her. It's like if Emma Chamberlain came out with a book, I'm sure it'd be huge because she has a
Mhm.
YouTube following and people love her. And so I think that also plays into it too. But yeah, I want to get into you as a writer because I enjoy just hearing the minds of writers and how they think. So like, how's your like writing process and for your
Oh
Publishing
God,
Confidential?
I don't have one. I really don't. It's funny because I was talking to my husband last night about the Substack, and I said, I really, now that I'm done with grad school for now, I have to get on a better schedule and make an editorial calendar and all that. And he was like, you don't do any of that? I was like, no, I fly by the seat of my pants. Like the day I feel like writing something is the day I write something. And I was even like this in grad school, which horrified, him. And but my sister is the same way. I need to sit down at the computer and just type it out and just get it out in one sitting. So obviously I'm not writing a book because that my writing process would not work in that, in that sense. But it I don't want to, give anybody the impression that I have some deep writing process for Substack when I absolutely don't. I will say this, I am working on a pretty lengthy piece right now that I am doing some research on and reading a lot, and it's going to take a little bit before I publish it. So every once in a while, I'll be like, this is something I need to spend more time on. But the rest of the time, it's like, what's new today in publishing? Maybe I'll write about it. And I do.
And because you have so much experience, do you mostly just kind of go off your experience, or are you still like if you're going to do a piece, are you reading up first, or how do you kind of gauge that when before you going into writing these bigger pieces?
Um, it depends. A lot of it is based on, I don't write about topics that I don't have any knowledge on at all because I don't want to give people information that's wrong, right? So you probably won't ever really see me write about kids' books because that's an area where I don't have any experience whatsoever, or really YA. But the rest of it is up for grabs. And what I do is I take my experience and all the different positions I've had in publishing and all the experience I've had in the almost 3 decades I've been doing this, and look at the topic that I'm covering. So the piece I'm working on is something about how media has changed and what publishers should be thinking about, now that a lot of clicks are drying up for media outlets and things like that. I know that because I'm a media junkie, at heart, I'm always a PR person. I've seen the changes, and I want to write about that. So I'm reading a lot of different articles that have come out about it, and I always link to them in my stories anyway. So that's one part of it. But most of the time, I'm taking my experience and saying, listen, this is how you read between the lines about this particular issue, and this is what's really going on. Give my audience. I want to demystify that stuff for people because it shouldn't be that deep, honestly.
No, it shouldn't, and that's what I think I really do enjoy about your Substack because it brings that. Because honestly, I feel like a lot of times when you look into publishing, there's like so many moving pieces. You really sometimes don't know everything. So your Substack really does a great job just like simplifying information and putting it like like just open ended, so people like us can
Thank you.
understand it, just a lot easier. And one of the things that did pop up this week was I think from the two ladies from Random House that
Mm,
ended up getting
yeah.
lost their jobs. Is that something you would write about, or like what do you think about that whole topic?
I wrote a really short piece about it. I didn't delve into it too deeply because I respect both of them and it's not my story to tell. But I will say a couple of things really honestly here is one, Lisa Lucas, who was the, publisher of Pantheon. Um, she came into the industry, she was at the National Book Foundation for a while. She had a nonprofit background. She's incredibly well respected. I respect her. I like her as a person. But sometimes when you put a person in a position as a publisher and they have no book publishing experience, that's almost setting that's almost setting someone up, for a bad situation in the future. And I think she did her job really well. But I also think that one of the unfortunate parts of Penguin Random House losing the DOJ case was that they had to pay $200 million to Paramount. So where's that money coming from? Knopf itself, and Reagan Arthur was the publisher of Knopf, and she's very well respected, someone I respect in the industry as well. Sometimes what it comes down to is simply office politics. And it's unfortunate because I think if Lisa, I hope that Lisa has a chance to be a publisher again, because I think she's super important in this industry for diverse voices. And I think that, someone else should hire her, and she would be fantastic wherever she landed or whatever she decides to do. And with Reagan Arthur, I mean, she was Sonny Mehta's hand-picked predecessor. So when you have a situation like that, and a new CEO comes in because the merger fell through, you're going to be under a microscope, and it's really unfortunate. And I think it's less of, oh, we need to save money and cut them because their salaries are so high. It's less of that and more of, well, there's a new CEO, we had to pay all this money because this merger fell through, and who can we cut?
Yeah.
Kind of a thing, which is grossly unfair to them.
Yeah, it is. And because I think Lisa also did Chain Gang All Stars, which is like one of the coolest books that I know a lot of people have been talking about how much they've loved that book over the years. So there was a growing level of, like you said, diversity that was coming from Penguin Random House in there. So I hope obviously they continue to push for that as well. And then, because then didn't the Penguin Random House's CEO, was it Madeline? She left too.
McIntosh,
So
yep.
McIntosh, and then she started her own author thing. So it's
Yes.
interesting to see that, to our point earlier, that continuing push for like different alternatives to publishing. I think that's going to continue to change based on just talking with you.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and then so speaking of that, I guess right before I kind of want to start to close, but as having 25 years in experience, like if you were to start a book publishing imprint, like what would be your best practice, or what would you think about kind of like building if you were building a publishing industry house?
Well, lucky for you, I've already thought about this.
Awesome.
And what one of the biggest, two of the biggest issues I believe are, the marketing of books and the delivery of that marketing. So there are things being underutilized in book publishing that, one big example that I can tell you is like mobile marketing. Book publishing doesn't use mobile marketing, and they should be, because that's where, that's what everybody's doing right now. That's what brands are doing. That's how you find out when there's a drop for a brand. And publishers aren't thinking that way. They need to think outside of their industry and look at every other industry and what's going on in those industries and how they're marketing things and how they're successful. And part of, one of the biggest problems in book publishing is that there's no scarcity. There are books that go on for days. So my way of changing things would be to create some scarcity by using different marketing methods. I don't want to get too much into it because I don't want to give too many things away, but it's all in the delivery method, the marketing method, and the book itself, and what it is, and who, and really whittling down who the audience is for that book. So there are so many things that are being underutilized or not utilized at all in the industry that I would change if I started my own company.
Yeah, I think you're right. And one of the things, even when I think about it too, is that if there's like even music, what's it called, record labels that only have like maybe 4 or 5 artists underneath it. But the way they roll out those albums is very unique, and then it gives each author, or I keep mixing up, but it keeps giving the artist that time to really use their platform the way they need to. And I think if you do push out less books, but you, like to your point, you market them in a very much more unique way, it's a full campaign and all that, I think I really do agree with you on that. So I'm glad you said that. Last question, before I kind of go into just books that you love. What what keeps you still loving this space after 25 years or
I
plus years?
just love books. I love books, and that's what it comes down to. I love books. I'm a huge proponent of literacy. I would love to see more work done in underserved areas in literacy because I think it's severely lacking. And I think the publishing world needs to have a reckoning about that. How are you going to get kids interested in reading? How are you going to get books in homes where people can't afford them? How are we going to keep libraries alive? Because they are institutions and communities. And I grew up in one of those communities where people can't necessarily afford to put books in their home, by buying them. So that's what keeps me going.
No, I love that. Yeah, let's talk about some books that you love. Like what's the last book you read? What are you currently reading, and what do you plan to read next?
So the last book I read was Grief is for People by Sloane Crosley, which I really liked. It is about her losing her best friend to suicide. And but it was also sort of in an odd way a love letter to book publishing. So I really enjoyed reading that. I am currently reading The Idea of You because I saw the
Okay.
movie on Amazon on Prime, and I have had the book forever. And I liked the movie, but I wanted to see what the book was like. So I'm in the middle of reading that right now. And the next book, I don't know what the next book is I'm gonna read. I there's a couple of summer reads that are great. One is the Memo by Rachel Dodds and a co-author. The other one that is really, really good that I kind of started and I need to get back into is The Sicilian Inheritance by Joe Piazza.
Oh
So
yeah.
those are two things that are kind of on my list right now. But the problem with me always is, as you can kind of see from my office back there, I have books everywhere.
Yeah.
Like I could pick, it's so hard. It depends on what my mood is. I
No.
could pick up a book and start reading it. And if I'm just not in the mood for that story, I'll put it down and read something else.
No, that's good. I definitely want to watch the idea of what's it called, the idea of you for sure. And I do want
Mhm.
to also check out that Sicilian book too, because I've seen that going around by I would say Joe Piazza, right? Yep.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I definitely will want to check that one out. The way I like to end this podcast is I always like to ask, it's kind of a two-sided question, but you can have two different answers for sure. What aspect would you like to see more of in the book world?
I would love to see more diversity in the book world. I really would. It is there's just not enough diversity in it, and that would be my number one wish right now in the book world.
That's fair. And then on the other side, what aspect would you like to see less of in the book world?
Less of, I would really like to see less complaining and more doing. I would like to see less complaining and more solutions. I would like to see less blame and more problem solving. So those all kind of go together. And that's what I feel like. I would love to see those. And I would really, really like to see young people be mentored more because I don't feel like there's enough of that going on either. And I attended a panel at the US Book Show, and it was by far the best panel that I attended. And I think every executive should have attended it, but of course they didn't. It was a panel of young people in publishing talking about issues they're facing today. And I went to it because I wanted to hear what they had to say, because if there's something that I want to do is hopefully, help the next generation getting into publishing and moving them forward. So I would really love to see more mentorship happening in a meaningful way.
Yep, I agree, and definitely that's why I said I read your Substack just for that, just to learn more. So, Kathleen, I really do appreciate you. Please feel free to share anything that's coming up in your world or how we can support in any way.
Sure. You could subscribe to Publishing Confidential on Substack. And if you're interested in my services, you can visit my website, which is KMSPR.com, and there's a form on there that you can email me. And, you know, even if you don't see something listed on my website that you're interested in, shoot me an email anyway, and we can talk about it, because not everything is there. And there are some things that I have to change as far as what I offer as services. But, you know, I would love to have more people, you know, read the newsletter, because I think what I'm trying to do is make it very accessible and also equitable, which is why, you know, I make a great deal of my content free.
Yep. Well, thank you so much. I'll make sure to put at the end of this podcast. So thank you so much again. It truly is a pleasure, Kathleen. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Kyle. It was nice talking to you.